Hello, friends, and welcome. I'm your co-host, Andrew Lazaga, here with Dubside.
And you're listening to the Dubcast with Dubside.
Well, summer's over already. Can you believe it?
Yeah, just about. End of September.
Yeah. Although here in the Pacific Northwest, the warm weather continues. And it's actually predicted to be above 80 degrees for a few days next week, which is like the first week of October.
Yeah, enjoy it while it lasts.
How are things in your area?
Pretty good. We are getting ready for last of the Kayak USA events. The pool that I have access to is not closed up for the winter, the outdoor pool. So I'm still getting a little rolling practice in there. In fact, I just got out of the pool about 20 minutes ago.
Nice. That's so convenient to have a pool.
Yeah. I haven't had that. I don't know if I've ever live right next to a pool. So yeah, I can really work on stuff. The pool's a little small. I can't quite do sculling rolls because if I'm in the deep end, it works. But then if I scull enough, I hit the side. And there's some slight issues there, but it's still nice to practice, right?
Well, do they really have to close it up for the winter?
Yeah. If you go below freezing, the pipes to the filter freeze and it ruins the whole filter, and then you got major problems. So
okay.
Unless you're going to run antifreeze through there, or I don't know what. But yeah, you pretty much have to close it up in the wintertime.
Oh, I see. Okay. All right. Well, your last Dubcast on compass navigation reminded me that this is the time of year, typically around August and September, that we get a lot of fog around Puget Sound and the San Juan Islands. So it's good to have some proficiency in compass navigation, especially if you're planning any trips involving long crossings. It's such a cool experience crossing through the fog while following a compass heading and not being able to see anything. And then emerging out of the fog and ending up exactly where you plan to be.
Yeah, that's navigation.
In fact, one of my very first Seacocking camping experiences involved that situation.
Okay.
And
tell me about it.
Okay. Well, I was taking a class with none other than George Gronseth, and it was going to be a weekend camping trip, and we were leaving from Anacortes, and then we were going to go out into the San Juan Islands. And George arrived a little late for the class. He had injured his back the day before, so he was a little uncomfortable. And we spent the morning talking about compass navigation, looking at the tides and currents, and going over the chart and discussing what our possible routes were going to be for the day. And the weather was a little unsettled. There was a little bit of rain, and then some fog started to roll in. And by mid-afternoon, he said, "You know what? We should cancel this weekend. I'll give you all a refund. I'm just not feeling up to it." He was uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So there I was with my kayak and all my camping gear packed, ready to go, and the whole.
This is that boat ramp on the end of like the Anacortes by where the ferry goes. There's a park down there with the picnic benches and all that.
Yeah, Washington Park.
Yeah,
right.
I know where it's at. Yeah. All right.
Yeah, very popular spot to go out to the San Juans because you don't need to take the ferry.
Yeah.
So I had a whole weekend ahead of me and nothing planned. So what would you do in that situation?
I'd probably go out paddle out there and do some camping.
Yeah. So but this, remember, this is like my first time. Okay.
Oh, well, I wouldn't. In that case, I wouldn't.
Well, I did. Okay.
You did?
Yeah. I paddled around, waited to see if the fog was going to lift. And later on it did. The sun came out.
Okay.
Turned out to be a beautiful day. This was like late August. And I said, okay, this is it. I'm going to go for it. We already went over all the data, right? So I knew what the currents were going to be like. So I just headed across Bellingham Channel to Cypress Island, which is like a 3-mile crossing. And the water was pretty calm. It was great. But guess what happened? I was like, when I got into the middle of the channel, guess what?
What happened?
The fog came back.
Ah, okay.
So this thick fog came back, and it was incredibly thick. And
Yeah.
before I made it, I mean, there were moments where you couldn't see across the channel.
Yeah.
But I did have my compass, and I
All
followed
right.
my compass heading, and I made
And
it.
now there tugs and barges come through there, right?
Yeah, there are some big tankers that actually come
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
the
It's
refinery
not
near
it's not a
Compass.
it's not a huge traffic area, but they do come through.
Yeah, yeah, that's
All
definitely
right.
a risk. But I made it. I camped over on Strawberry Island, which is the small island,
Yeah.
just a little bit offshore.
Yeah.
And it was
Okay.
an incredible experience because I woke up the next morning and this huge pod of orca whales came swimming
Wow.
by.
Yeah.
Yes, there must have been, at least 15 of them. And some came
Wow.
so close to shore you could see their eyes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it
Oh,
was just a magical
nice.
experience. Yeah, and
Hmm.
after that, I was just hooked on sea kayaking.
Yeah.
So,
That's it.
another thing I forgot to mention is that I didn't know how to roll yet.
Okay.
Yeah, but I was,
Had you done like a wet exit and a reentry
yeah, I,
practice?
I was confident in
Okay.
my ability
All right.
to do a paddleful rescue, although
Okay.
I know there's some question about whether that's effective at all in rough water.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And drifting in the channel, trying to do that when you see a ship coming, that can be pretty intimidating,
there you
if not fatal.
go. But
Yeah.
I met a couple on the island, and I was way more prepared than they were. I mean, I had a dry suit and a
Okay.
radio, and
Yeah.
they weren't even wearing immersion wear. And
Hmm.
this young woman was paddling a plywood kayak that didn't even have any flotation, didn't have any
No bulkheads.
bulkheads. Yeah,
Yeah. No, that's
yeah.
bad.
So,
Well.
yep. Just yesterday, a colleague of mine asked me about how to get started in sea kayaking. They just bought a house on the water in Puget Sound, decided that
Yeah.
they'd get a kayak and explore around, and asked
Hmm.
me, do you really need to take lessons to go sea kayaking? This comes from people who just want to do it casually and not be really serious about it. And I don't know what to tell these people because there's so much to know, I don't even know where to start. What would
Hmm.
you do in that kind of situation?
Well, if somebody goes to the big retailers and gets a couple $100 for a recreational kayak and just goes floats in some pond, a little lake by the house, that's one thing. But if you're living on Puget Sound, that's serious water there. There are big tides and currents in there, and that weather kicks up, and that I would recommend some instruction. In fact, so I would say is, if nothing else, find a copy of probably at Kayak Academy at George's place. He still has copies of that book, Deep Trouble, and
Yeah.
just give him a copy of that book. Here, you might want to read this. And when you read that and you see the disaster stories in there, it's people paddling right in that area. Like the park you just talked about. People launch right there. There's a story in that book of some people launching right there.
Yep.
And just they bought a kayak and let me just go out and check that out. I had no idea what the current, what the wave, and they didn't even live. So if nothing else, just tell somebody here, you might want to read this book. Just check it out. And once they read that stuff, they realize, okay, this is some serious stuff here. That would be my recommendation.
Yeah, I think that's a great recommendation. Well, what
Hmm.
I did actually was I referred her to Moulton Avery's site,
Hmm.
coldwatersafety.org.
Yeah. Okay.
Very similar to Deep Trouble. He has a collection of cases where
Yeah.
people died or nearly died from kayaking and canoe accidents. For those who don't know, Moulton Avery is an internationally recognized authority on cold water safety.
Yeah. We mentioned him back in what episode number, way back when, somewhere.
Okay, yeah. I should also mention that he is a Greenland style enthusiast.
Yeah.
So, yeah, very important to know the risks of paddling in cold water.
Yeah. If the water's cold, you can, and you're not dressed for it, bad things can happen.
Okay, so what's coming up for you?
Well, as I said, the last of the season Kayak USA event, or the last major one, was the Delmarva Paddlers Retreat, which is taking place in 2 weeks from now. And I'm getting ready to go to that. It'll be the first one since the pandemic. So we're all looking forward to coming back and seeing people in person we haven't seen in a couple of years.
All right. Hey, maybe you can get some interviews in with people.
Oh, I'm doing that. Oh yeah, yeah. I'll
Awesome.
bring all of my equipment, everything. Oh yeah, tape will be rolling for sure.
And a whole bunch of Dubcast with Dubside guitar picks.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. I'll bring a good supply of guitar picks and hand them out. Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, well, we're going to go ahead and start number 32 here, titled Traditions Old and New.
All right, here it is. Welcome to the Dubcast with Dubside. This is Dubcast number 32. A little while ago in Dubcast number 29, I was looking at navigating cultural differences and ways to avoid problems. I'd like to take another look at that, go into a little bit more detail with some further stories in this Dubcast. And I have a song that ties into the unique culture of Greenland. And this goes back quite a ways, written by the very talented songwriter Siiva Fleischer, who we've heard some songs of his before. He had the group called Zikaza. Suppose you were wealthy enough to afford to buy a baseball team. And suppose that you had some relative or someone who was upcoming in the minor leagues, and since it's your baseball team, you can just dictate what the people running the team do. So you say, I want this guy to play on the team, hire him, give him a job on the team. And suppose that you were born, say, in the year 1942. So you said, give him the number 42. I want to see a 42 on his jersey when he plays. Well, if you know anything about baseball trivia, you cannot do that because in 1997, all Major League Baseball teams decided to honor Jackie Robinson, the first player to break the color barrier, 50 years after he did that, and all the teams retired the number 42. So you cannot put that on a new player's jersey. That number is retired. You can't do that. And if you, as a new owner, attempted to do that, you would create for yourself a troubling situation because there would be protests, and then you'd have to either make excuses and try to justify it or apologize for your mistake, or it would be something of a minor scandal and not a good way to start your ownership of a baseball team. In Greenland, maybe they play baseball. Haven't seen any of that myself. They play a lot of what we call in this country soccer, which they and everyone else calls football. And they have basketball in Greenland too. But I want to tell you about a little piece of Greenland tradition that goes way, way back. And this came into play when you have a hunter goes out and brings back, say, a seal, or whatever the big animal is, and you cut up you butcher the animal, and there are choice parts of it, certain of the organs and things that taste very appealing, and so those get, you might, the friend of the hunter or some other key person might get those. Those are divided up their own way. But then you just have the basic meat. So, if it's a big walrus or something, you've got all this meat, pretty much the same type of meat. And say you've got, the village has the number of people involved there is, say maybe you have 15 people, and this is the only guy who caught anything that day. So they're going to divide it up, or that week, they're going to divide it up, and you want to give everyone an equal piece. And this, there's no fancy electronic scales or anything. You're just trying to divide it in a fair way. So how do you divide up a huge hunk of meat, 15 pieces in an equitable way? Well, in Greenland, they had this method that came about from generations way back, where you got, say, 15 people.
and everybody knows everyone's name. It's a small little village situation. So one person cuts up the meat as close as they can. It's not going to be exactly the same piece. One piece a little bit bigger, a little bit smaller. And then you have somebody else turns their back, and you say, okay, so the guy with the meat puts his knife on one piece of meat, and then the person who with their back turned calls out a name at random, anybody's name, say Nuussuaq. And they say, okay, this piece of meat goes to Nuussuaq. And they say, okay, another name, and they say Ikinngut. And then he's got his knife pointed to a different piece of meat. And so in that way, it's done randomly, because there's the person calling out the names doesn't know what piece of meat is being up for grabs then, and the person selecting the meat doesn't know what name is coming, so it's a fair way to do it. And you see, it's also a very transparent way to do it, because everyone there can watch and see that the guy with his back turned isn't looking or getting signals from somebody, and the guy cutting up the meat isn't trying to signal if it's a big or small piece of meat. And you don't have to watch that if you don't care about how fair it is, or if you trust them all. But if you're worried about it, you can sit there and watch and make sure that they do it in the way it's supposed to be done. And that is how the meat is distributed in a fair way. Well, as I've said, I started to go to the Greenland kayak competition in 2004. And in 2010, they had me help with the judging. And some years after that, I think we were in the town of Nuuk, the big town. And being familiar with, the how things run somewhat. So we're in the cafeteria room at the beginning of the competition, when all the teams have gotten there, and there's always a lot of hurry up and wait kind of thing. If somebody's got to go find something, and you just sit there and wait, and hang out. So they had the list of all the competitors, and so they have to print these things up. And some years they're a little tighter on the printing. Other times it's harder to get information, or they have new lists get printed up sometimes. But it's an effort to get the right data together, and to the print, somebody to type it in and print it up. So we're sitting in the cafeteria, and they hand out a list. So it's got everybody who's going to be there. They finally got that information all together. So these are from all the different teams and who's competing. And then they had a projector to put it up on a screen in front of everybody. And then there's a thing about the number that you compete with. They give everyone you have to wear a little. Sometimes they make jerseys. Sometimes they print it on a piece of Tyvek or something, and you pin that to your clothing, so they can see who's in the race and who's throwing their harpoon and things like that. So I came to learn that the number that you get determines the order that you go for the ropes and the rolling and the harpoon throwing. So, if my number is say 25 and somebody else is 26 and 27, I have to do the ropes before they do the ropes. And for the very keen competitors vying for the title, this works into their strategy, because if I am going to do the ropes, but I know that I've got a high number in my age category and I go last, that means that I will be able to see all the other competitors in my group. And I'll be able to see how well they've been training, and I'll know by the time I have to start to compete whether I have to really, really push hard to do my best, or if I can take it easy and I get the gold medal anyway, because I've already seen them compete. Whereas if I'm competing first, I have no idea what other people's levels are, if they've been practicing or not, and I pretty much just have to go as hard as I can, and potentially wear myself out. It's a whole week, so I've got races to do and other stuff coming up. But so I'm really, really exerting myself on the ropes. I have to, because I don't know what other people's scores are. So there's an advantage to getting a higher number. So we were sitting in this lunchroom, cafeteria at Nuuk, a preliminary meeting, and they had finally had this list of all the names and the numbers. But then they were reassigning the numbers. They were changing it. Where there was somebody was saying something, and they're different names, and I'm thinking, oh, come on, they just rendered this list obsolete. They took all the trouble to get this list printed up of all the people competing, and now they switched the numbers around, the competition numbers, and so, why did they print this list up? It's a waste of time. This is, come on, I could, make a computer program that would just generate random numbers, assign random numbers in each age category, and do it that way. And then, before you print this thing up, get the numbers set up that way, and then you don't have to print it twice. It's inefficient. Well, I was imposing my ideas on their system and trying to think of what they should do. And there is that word, should. Well, in that situation, I just kept quiet, as my recommendation is, shut up, watch and listen, and try to learn something. So I just let it go, and later I asked, I think it was John Peterson, and he explained to me, and I should have known this, they had a process for assigning the competition numbers in a fair and transparent way. The names of all the people in one age category are projected on the wall or otherwise visible to everyone, and one person turns their back on the screen, and they say, okay, that we got numbers, 61 to 72 here. And so the person at the screen holds their finger on one name while the person with their back turned calls out a number at random. How about 69? And that person gets the number 69. Then they go to a different name and say, give us another number. And they say, oh, 71. And that is how it's done. A celebration of Greenland culture going back to the old days. And it makes very good use of the transparency and fairness of that method. Now, without taking the time to really understand the situation, the culture, it'd be very easy for an outsider put in a position of authority, like, say, a Danish administrator in some situation in the past, to institute a system that they thought was better. Say, okay, we'll have a computer generate random numbers, just assign them to the names. And you can imagine that would cause some suspicion and apprehension about somebody put this system in place. We don't know how fair it is. We don't know who's getting the right number. They've got it rigged somehow. This is not how we do things. And it also has the effect of disrespecting someone's cultural history by erasing one of their traditions. And this would be similar to, say, a rich Inuit person buying a baseball team and saying, this is my team, I'll do whatever I want. I got a new player, give him the number 42. Any number's as good as another. What's the big deal? And you can imagine the controversy that could generate with accusations of disrespecting Jackie Robinson's legacy, and charges of racism, etc. Well, going back to that situation where we're sitting in the cafeteria in Nuuk, and they're printing up these lists, and then me being so concerned that they were rendering the list obsolete by changing the numbers. Actually, they knew they were going to print more lists. That wasn't really a problem at all. This was a preliminary list, just the names and what numbers that would eventually be rearranged, and then it would just print up another version of it later. That was how they were going to do it. Unfortunately, I think that's a pattern of interacting cultures where it's the, things done with good intentions. Let me make this better. You got an inefficient system here. Let me fix this, without really taking the time to understand what's involved. And you end up making it much worse and causing a lot of resentment. So for the record, let me just review my little evaluation tool for these situations, which is the three questions when you're coming up with the word should in your head. You stop and you ask yourself, 1, am I a genuine expert in this field? Where did I get my PhD from? 2, have I taken the time to understand the context here, that this is a different culture, a different history, different geography? And number 3, Is anyone asking me for my opinion on this matter? And if the answer to anything is no there, then you need to just be quiet, watch and listen, and learn something. So when I'm in Greenland, I'm always looking to add to my collection of Greenlandic music and going through CDs at various stores where I find them. And I also come across DVDs or other various forms of video. And when I see those, I only look for one thing. Does it have English subtitles? If it does, sold. I'm headed to the cash register. I'll take it. At this point, I've got maybe a dozen or so discs of video material. And some of them are documentaries that are kind of boring. I mean, they're interesting, they're just not all that exciting. And there are some feature-length movies. I mentioned that one called Heart of Light, which stars Rasmus Lubeth. And there's some other ones, full-length films with a plot line and music and everything. They're done very well. There's several discs of music videos with selected bands on them that actually they're not translated into English, but they're interesting. I like those. And there's a movie that band Chili Friday play a fictional band in this movie. There's a whole plot line behind that. That's an interesting film. I've got some live concert footage of a couple different groups, including Nuussuaq. I've mentioned that one before, the Nuussuaq live CD and DVD set, which is worth getting. There's the scary film that I mentioned before, Kakat Alungui. That's entertaining. And I found one that's called Nuussuaq, Nuummioq. It says won a bunch of awards. And this is a full feature-length movie, and it stars that this Julie is one of the best-known singers in Greenland. She sings most of her stuff in English. She plays one of the lead roles in that movie, and quite a good actress. And under the theme of cultural differences, in that movie, there's a hunting scene. They go out and they shoot a caribou, and they bring it back in. They have to butcher it or something like that. And so at the end of the film, you know how you see movies and then it'll have all the credits and hundreds of names involved in the production of some film, and then the special notices at the end include things like the animals used in this film were monitored by the people for the ethical treatment of animals, and no animals were harmed in the making of this film. So in making this Greenlandic movie, you have a scene where caribou is shot and cut up, and Greenlanders have their own feelings and tradition, culture, and history about animals. And so at the end of that movie, comes up on the screen, it says along the bottom, all the animals used in this film were killed, eaten, and enjoyed. If that's what they want to do in Greenland, I don't have a problem with that. Well, some other year that I went to Greenland, I found a new DVD that had come out, and it was called Okarit Inushlitishlu, which translates to Say It and Live. And I looked at the packaging, and it said it had English subtitles, so I bought it. Yep, I'll take that. And I got it home, or maybe later on in my traveling, got a chance to take a look at it. So it's a story about, somewhat of a documentary. So this woman, she writes a play, and then there are parts of the play in the movie, but the movie isn't the whole play. This describes her touring Greenland, the different towns in Greenland, to perform this play with the actors. It's just 3 or 4 people as the whole cast. And so the play, it turns out, it's about sexual abuse and suicide. And clearly this was not light entertainment. These are some heavy topics. And like in the U.S., like other countries, there are social problems that need to be addressed. So the title of the movie, Say It and Live, indicates the idea that one must speak about past bad experiences, because just hiding it inside just adds to the emotional trauma, and you really need to talk to someone about it. And so the scenes in the movie, she meets the playwriter meets with people, and she gets to a town, and they're saying, okay, we have this, here's the hall, we have it rented out, and you have the chairs, here's how many people it'll hold, and we'll have to sell tickets. And she's saying, no, you need to have an emergency response team. This would be psychological counselors, and they must be on standby during the play, because this is traumatic enough that there'll be people that will, get re-experiencing their trauma and need some help right then on the scene. And the movie does show there are performances where members of the audience just lose it and start screaming or crying. Some heavy stuff. Yeah, I think it was either that year or the next year, I was in one of the stores in Greenland that was a small version of a department store, and they have the section with the CDs and music and LED screens and things like that, and they were playing this movie on the screen just in the store, and I was somewhat taken aback. You don't walk into a store where they want you to buy things and expect to see people talking about opening up about being sexually abused as a kid, and that's heavy stuff. But then I mean, different culture, maybe maybe the person at the store didn't just throw it in there to sell some of these. I don't know, but I was certainly not expecting to see a deep topic like that just out on display in a store. Well, unfortunately, anytime you have kids interacting with adults who aren't their parents, you have situations where these bad things can occur. And the kayak clubs in Greenland have had their incidents of this happening. Some of them way in the past, some of them during the time I've been there. And it is a very, very unfortunate situation when you have accusations and then you have people having to take sides to support somebody who's been accused. They're claiming it's a false accusation. And you have the parents of the kids who could have been victimized. And that's very, very troubling situation, but something you have to go through sometimes. So in this play, they feature a song, and this song was done. There are a couple of songs performed in this play, but the one I think that really speaks to the title of the movie was written by that very well respected musician from the past, Siiva Fleischer, and his group Zikaza. And he is the author of that song that Nina sings, Nuussuaq Takuyuk, which is as I said, is the unofficial national anthem of Greenland. You remember that one? Nuussuaq Takuyuk Inofficial Tauna. So he wrote that song, and I did that one called Nuunasuata Nipa. That was from Dubcast number 11. That's also a song written by Siiva Fleischer. So this would be a third song by Siiva Fleischer, and this is called Ikingut. And the lyrics appear to be speaking directly to someone who has been victimized. And, the decades can pass, and if someone doesn't speak about it and just keeps hiding it inside of them, they'll never get over it. And in the words of the movie, you must say it and live. So Ikingut translates to my friend, and the lyrics go, open up, my friend, for your soul. Open up the gate for the things that you hide away. Show them off, my friend, the basis of your life, the suffering. Tell all about it. Open up. And it goes down towards the last verse. Show us what is going on in your life. Tell about it without hiding anything. Then you will feel how you will reach the harmony of your life. Here is the song Ikingut.
Amalaru Ikingut Kakamuna Pengisa Vitoko Seviata Matua Amalaruk Nitalaki Ikingut Enune Pitoke Seviata Esdogiga Suta Nitalakit Amarit Sapianek Matoka Subok Takuchikite Nune Pepiane Sikita Masa Esetonagit Malugi Savatava Enune Pitoke Sevi Fia Cache de Sonk Tamavita Ikingut Enunitas da Tinguta Salose Masabugut Tamavita Umatinu Ikingut Ayone Luvoki Lungesutit Mata Tu Ashunit Umatinut Annihat Inone Muta Ilavok Takuchikiti Nune Pepiani Sikita Masa Esetonagit Malugi Savatava Inune Pitoke Sevi Fia Cache les socs
And there you have the song Ikingut, my version of it. Originally done by the group Zikaza on a CD entitled Miki Goes to Nuussuaq. And his music is so timeless. This was his... Actually, the album was recorded in the late 1980s, over 30 years ago. But it is still, I suppose it's been reprinted. So you can still get it at atlanticmusic.gl. On the cover, it's a drawing of, it looks like an outer space kind of a theme. Surface of a planet with the stars off in the distance. And all 10 songs have the full English translation. And I'm not sure if this is a concept album. But the guy's got a lot to say. Well, if you've listened to the Dubcast for a long time, you know that sometimes Andrew has a special interview, and other times it's me with the regular Dubcast. And Andrew works very hard to track these people down and find time that they have to sit down for an interview. And he's been working on Brian Schultz, who you may have heard me mention, a guy in Oregon who builds kayaks. He's done that for many, many years. And Brian's a busy guy. Brian has also had some health issues he's had to deal with. Well, I have in my own personal archives a 2009 recording of a presentation that Brian Schultz did. And I'm going to edit that down to a manageable length and let you listen to that next time in Dubcast 33.